Everybody has a story of how things became what it is.
And all of the stories that we're experiencing up to date are all based on the original mythological story.
Myths are ways of codifying profound truths.
And so in order to pass on the knowledge of these things, our ancestors began to put them in the form of stories.
Because myth becomes a way of speaking to that.
And it's all considered to be mythology because it is based on a belief.
And then we create rituals that reinforces the logic and the knowledge of the myth.
The story then goes into a ceremony that is constantly going to remind people.
That's where the rituals come in, where we begin to practice this, what they call Assyrian drama.
This story, this African story of an African trinity, is over 6,000 years old.
There's several different pieces of that story that are in direct correlation to the story of Jesus.
Scholars know this. Why do they allow people keep thinking it's a religion unless they have an untoward agenda? And it's very clear that they've created a lot of confusion.
All right. You just what did you just see? Was it the Matrix? Was it Star Wars? Is it Out of Darkness? Is it Heavy as the Crown? You guys just saw the trailer for Heavy as the Crown. If you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button. You are tuned into the first show of the 7 collection. I am your host, Amadeuz Christ. I'm not too important other than I did a film called Out of Darkness. You guys might have seen it. If not, check it out. All the links are in the description box below. Please share this out. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that share button. We got a very, very, very special guest for our premiere episode. The honorable, respected elder of the African community, master teacher, cultural African historian. We have none other than Dr. Professor Baba Kaba Hiawatha Kamene. How you doing today?
My brother, I am doing excellent, close to supreme. I've been waiting for this day, this conversation for a while, brother.
Good. I'm happy to have you on the show. You know, Dr. Kaba, we have a lot of conversations on the phone. You know, I'll be chilling at the house and, you know, I might be having a good day, I might be having a bad day, or I might be going through something. And then my phone will ring and I'll get a call from 1 or 3 people. It'll either be Professor Kaba, or it'll be Tony Browder, or it'll be Professor James Small. And I'm very, very fortunate to have these elders, these honorable members of our community just reach out to me from time to time and kind of touch bases with me and just see how I'm doing. And every time I talk to you, Brother Kaba, you always give me some sound word of advice. Whatever I'm going through, you seem to kind of have a word of inspiration for me at the time that really just helps me out. And I always wish we could record these conversations. You know, so it's only right that I bring you on for the first episode and we could actually record one of these conversations and have one online for everybody to see.
Okay.
So let's get into it. Professor Kaba, let's get into Professor Kaba's origin story.
Okay.
If there's anybody who doesn't know who you are, introduce yourself. Tell the audience who Kaba Hiawatha Kamene is and how did he become Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene.
Okay, my brother, again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank you for doing the work that you do. We're passing the baton, and you have graciously and competently accepted it. So you keep doing what you're doing, brother. I'm just so proud of you and your family and everything that you represent. As it relates to my origins, I'm from New York. I was born with the name Booker Taliaferro Coleman Jr., and I corrected it as of May 10th, 2002. So this May 10th, I'm going to be 20 years old. So, because when I went to get my name, when the final day came and my name went from Booker T. Coleman to Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, the sister that gave me my papers said Booker T. Coleman Jr. no longer exists.
Okay.
This is the birth of Kaba Hiawatha Kamene. So that's how I got the name. And it means to unify. It means unify. And so my background basically is, as a name, Booker T. Coleman, I was always in the culture. But it was what I find interesting as it specifically pertains to 7, and it pertains to Out of Darkness, and particularly Heavy as the Crown, is the fact that I grew up in a project, Midtown Manhattan, and I had friends of many different cultural backgrounds, particularly from Puerto Rico. And my friend's family practiced Santeria, which is the African entranced faith system that our ancestors from Nigeria, Yoruba, brought to this part of the world with the 7 powers, with the Orishas. And the reason why I always tell this story first is because when I would visit his home and they would be having celebration, Santeria, the music, the dance, the food, the smell, the vibrations. Grew up Roman Catholic, so I was never exposed to any of what I saw as it related to Santeria, las 7 potencias, the 7 powers, Espiritismo, which is a Native American, African formation of an original faith system. And the reason why I always tell this story was because I was not introduced to Africa through history. I would be introduced to Africa specifically through history when I would first meet Professor John Henrik Clarke when I was 12 and a half. But from the age of 8, 9, 10, I had been immersed in this celebration of African spirituality. So what is interesting for the work that I do, I was not introduced. Well, let me put it to you in the positive sense. I was introduced to African history and culture through spirituality and in the Spanish language before I met Professor John Henrik Clarke and learned the historical aspect. And the reason why I wrote my book, Spirituality Before Religions, and then the follow-up, Shabaka Stone, and the reason why Heavy as the Crown was so very important to me is because with your cinema genius, with your graphic art genius, bringing African spirituality to the screen, and with my beginnings from African spirituality, from that depth of understanding, my participation in your film, Heavy as the Crown, brought things around in a very interesting circle for me. Because I know that when people see Heavy as the Crown, there will be aspects of themselves that will be touched deeply, just as I was touched deeply as a child. And this will be a life-changing experience for people. There's no question in my mind, because I know what the introduction of African spirituality did for me. It did something that Professor John Henrik Clarke would tell me years later when I would talk to Dr. Clarke and we would have our conversations. I asked him, what is the one thing that you would want to give every black person that you speak to, every dark person, every African person, whatever you want to call yourself, what is the one thing that you'd want to give them? And he said, I'd want to give them a sense of self-concept. Self-concept marries self-knowledge, self-acceptance. It joins acceptance, acknowledge, and approval all together through self-knowledge, self-concept. To know who you are, know where you came from, and understand that nobody can make you think you are somebody if you don't think that.
Right.
And that is what I've always tried. I'm educator, retired from the Board of Education 2009 after 31 years teaching in the Board of Ed.
Okay.
I taught 14 years college. I've taught every grade. I've taught every subject in my career. I have watched our people grow, ascend through consciousness, and I've also seen them lose that consciousness. Because every child is born with consciousness.
Right.
And through their cultivation, that's where the word culture comes from, to cultivate. Through the adults, through the parents cultivating that self-concept, they then become grounded in themselves. And so no matter who comes at you with any story about trying to get you to believe you are somebody, if you don't believe that, they have no power over you.
Right.
The only power people have is when they can convince you that they're right. And Dr. Wade Nobles tells us that power is the ability to define someone's reality and have that person accept that definition as if it were their own.
Absolutely. Dr. Kaba, how was it coming up under the tutelage of Dr. Clark during that time? Because I know that, you know, he had his hand on you, so to speak, and he had a very, very high standards for scholarship and teaching. And I kind of want you to touch on that. And also, we had a conversation a while ago where I was asking you some questions about the origins of the African-centered movement that was taking place in the 80s and the 90s, particularly the 80s. And you directed me towards First World Alliance. And I just kind of wanted you to touch on that and how all of that came into being.
First World Alliance was a Saturday study group that came about through the phenomenon of Sister Kefa, Nephthys, and Brother Bill Jones. Brother Sam and Sister Alicia, I believe that's her name. Please forgive me if I don't have Sister's name right, but there were 4 that came together. They were all part of the labor movement. They knew how to organize. And twice a year, they had two terms. Normally, they had 10 speakers come in. One was like mid-September, November, December. Then they broke. They came back together maybe in February until about June. 10 weeks. And in the beginning, it was just Dr. Ben. And then it became Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. And then it became Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Amos Wilson. And then what happened is that it became so successful. They had these lectures at the church on 145th Street. And it was right off Convent Avenue and 145th Street in New York, for those that know New York. But it was a major thoroughfare in Harlem. That's really the point I'm trying to make, is we have it in Detroit, we have it in Los Angeles, we have it everywhere we go. We always have that main strip where Black folk hang out, and it becomes important. So this was an area that was very productive. And I started going to First World Alliance in 1978, 79. And I call this the golden age of my era. Every generation has their golden age. This was our golden age. And this is where they introduced us to speakers like Dr. Richard King, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Naeem Akbar. They brought Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, all of the major scholars, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, all of the major scholars from East to West Coast came to First World. They had a program in New Jersey on Sundays. This was Saturday. On Sundays, African Echoes was very much like First World. And whoever spoke at First World on Saturday spoke at African Echoes on Sunday.
And what year is this, Dr. Kaba?
You're talking about I'm talking about 1978, 1979,
okay,
going up until about 2004, 2005. And I remember I started out, you know, and this was a big church now. This was not a small church. This is a Lutheran church on the hill. And there was a practice that we all knew, and that is that if we came in and sat down, and if a sister came in and there was no more room, brothers had to get up and give the sister a seat. That was just an understanding. So me being me, I said, I don't feel like sitting down or getting up. And I know this place is going to be packed, so I know I'm going to have to stand up. So I used to always go to the right. When the speaker was looking at the audience, I was always in the back right hand with my audio cassette player, because I was taping these speakers. And I still have their collection downstairs in my storage room. And I would go, they also had a school, the Harlem School of Africana Studies, twice a week. And by 1983, well, let me go back. Dr. Richard King out of Los Angeles had gotten Dr. Ben to take a group of them to Kemet. And then it was so successful, Dr. Ben did other trips, small groups. By 1983, I was such that I was ready to go. And so I went to Kemet in 1983 with Dr. Ben. It was the largest group that ever went to Kemet at one time, 248 of us. Now, when it comes to Dr. Ben, there comes something that all of us have to understand of what he contributed, because there are things that happened that we missed the point. Up until this time, large groups of African people did not come. The great majority of African Americans that went to Egypt went as a side trip after going to Israel.
Oh, wow.
To study the Holy Land. And most of the African Americans that went to Egypt went for a day or two, but their real purpose of being in this area was to go to Israel. Egypt happened to be a trip that they all went to the pyramids and did their thing. So the great majority of African original Kemetic people, original Egyptian people, never really were exposed to African Americans before. But what Dr. Ben did in bringing us there from the late 70s on, he did two things. Number one, he exposed Africans and African Americans to Nubians, because that's what that's what Africans are called, that are close to the African, that embrace their Africanity.
Right.
Most of them are in the southern lands.
Right, Aswan.
And then by the time you get it to Luxor, it's like a mix of half.
Right. Totally different. Totally different.
It's totally, but by the time you get to Cairo,
you
know, it is all those that came after the Muslim movement into Kemet.
Right.
After that, that's who they are.
Okay.
And so what Dr. Ben did was expose Nubians to African Americans. For the first time, we met face to face. But not just that, Dr. Ben told us, okay, I'm going to tell you something else Dr. Ben told us. 2 weeks before we went in 1983, because I went again in 87. But in 1983, my first time, I never been to Kemet. And Dr. Ben, we went to the church that we're talking about here, on that, the church on the hill. And Dr. Ben told us, he said, listen here, this is what I want to tell you. I don't want you to blame me for the person that's going to come back. Because the person that's going to come back is not the person that's sitting in this church right now. Brother Amadeus, he was absolutely correct. I have not been the same person.
I'm glad.
I haven't been the same person.
Wow.
It's a different dynamic,
Yeah.
particularly when you go with someone like when we went to Kemet. And you
Right.
see, the other thing Dr. Ben told us in the church, he said, look, let me tell you something. I'll tell you where to spend your money. Okay, you ain't going to spend your money all over the place because they'll be trying to sell you King Tut's teeth. Yeah, I'll tell you where to spend your money. So that's what he did. And look, man, I was a teacher. I had family, you know. I didn't have money. I went with $500. But there was other people who went with thousands of dollars.
Right.
And they went there and they spent their money. And in 1987, 1,000 of us just came in on Kemet for the conference, the Nubian conference. And they had to have over 30 buses careening through Kemet with us on them. They wrote articles about us. They put us on TV.
My goodness.
But you see, what Dr. Ben did when we spent our money with our brothers and sisters, you see, I'll tell you another story. 1987. See, Dr. Ben was like a folk hero. For most Nubians, and when I say Nubian, I'm talking about the indigenous African person that was in Kemet. To most Nubians, they didn't see Dr. Ben. So he became almost like a mythological figure. Every elder black man that spoke English, they say, you Dr. Ben? You Dr. Ben? Everybody thought it was Dr. Ben. And
wow.
I met this brother Muhammad who lived in the community behind the hotel where I stayed in Aswan. I stayed in the Oberon hotel that's on the island there in Aswan. Most people stayed in the old Cataract and the new Cataract hotel that was on mainland. I stayed on the hotel, Oberoi. And I told him, because I used to get on his felucca, his boat. It was called Christmas. And he would take us all up and down Hapi, the river. We would travel and he would talk to us. And wow, we had all sorts of conversations. And when I was going back, he said, what do you plan on doing this evening? And I said, well, there's going to be a conference at the hotel. Dr. Ben is going to be speaking. He said, you know Dr. Ben? I said, yeah, that's what I came for. He said, I hear about Dr. Ben. He's real famous. Do you think I can come? I said, sure. Come on. And I told him what time I would be there. And there was a ferry that would take you across. But he came with his felucca and he brought me right to the old Cataract. And Gil Noble was there. Dr. Clark was there. Asa Hilliard was there. See, this was when everybody, Jake Carruthers was there. And it was Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and Gil Noble, the executive producer of the show Like It Is, that was going to do this conference, this panel discussion. And so we were going in and, there was a place where, the cars come in and there's a guy out front that will open it up and let you through, and then he'll close the barrier. Well, I was walking and I was just talking to Muhammad, and all of a sudden I realized he went around. I looked back and he was over by the station where the guy was. And I walked back. I said, Muhammad, you coming? And he told me he can't. It's 1987, family. And I say, you don't want to meet Dr. Ben? He said, no, I want to meet Dr. Ben. I just can't go into the hotel. I said, why can't you go? He said, because Nubians aren't allowed in the hotel. Okay, now I got me a Mississippi flashback right about now. Okay, and I say, no, there ain't no way this is gonna happen on my watch. And I told the brother, and there was a Nubian there. He had to enforce the rules.
Right.
Okay. So I told the Nubian brother, I said, I'd like him to come with me. He said, sir, I can't let him in because it's a rule. We can't go. He said, I can't even go in there. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Whoever you talk to, whoever you report to, whoever's in charge of this, I want you to tell them that if Muhammad doesn't come into this hotel with me, I'm bringing 1,000 African Americans out of that hotel right out here. And we're going to deal with this situation. Because if those people in there knew that this brother could not get into this hotel, I said, you may not know African American history. You may not know Caribbean, Central, South American history, but we got a history like this. And black folk go places wherever they want to go now. And guess what? This brother's coming in with me. Let them know that. Tell them 1,000 people are going to come out of here and going to have a problem with y'all if he's not allowed in. So he called them up. I said, I'm going to step aside because I don't have to hear what you got to tell them.
Right.
You just have to tell them that if he can't come in, I'm going in there and bringing them out.
Right.
Well, the brother got in.
I knew he did.
But I tell that story only to help us understand what Dr. Ben did. Because had I not been in this situation, and I'm sure any of the other African-American brothers and sisters or Caribbean-American brothers and sisters who were in there would have done the same exact thing. So in Dr. Ben bringing us, and thanks to Dr. Richard King for starting the process, and ASCAC and First World Alliance for starting this process, not just that. Here's the most important thing Dr. Ben did. We spent thousands of dollars with black folk, our Nubian brothers and sisters. We made the Egyptian government bring them to the table to negotiate with these brothers because these black folk had more wealth than most of the Egyptian, if you want to call them that, people. So we're talking green right now. And we started telling them how to spend money with themselves. Don't go out there and be spending money with people that don't look like you. Just like we spending money with you, we spending money with you because like this is what we used to do. Nubian.
Yep. They call you, they say same color. That's it. Cousin. You wait, we same. They were doing that to me the whole time. They probably do that because of you guys.
It's all the growth. This is what I'm saying, what Dr. Ben did. It just wasn't bringing us there and teaching us about the temples and teaching about the pyramids. It was more than that. He brought black folk together from one side of the world to the other. And he allowed, I remember I spoke to a professor because we had it at the Nubian Conference Center in Aswan. And I remember that this brother made it so that I could meet one of the elder professors. Because I told him I was a teacher. So he brought his teacher, Nubian brother, and he brought us onto a felucca, onto a boat with another brother that was there. And this professor and I had an extensive conversation about knowledge and wisdom. He told me, Brother Amadeus, and to the family that's in tune, he told us that the first time he ever met, the year before, he met an African-American heart surgeon. He said he never knew surgeons existed that were African-Americans.
Wow.
We met Nubians back in the 80s that thought that black folk were still enslaved.
Wow.
We met people that thought that the hero for African-American people that did everything for black people was Abraham Lincoln. That's what they teach them in the schools.
Wow.
But I also met people that understood that they were the original people of Kemet.
Wow.
And you could tell the difference, Brother Amadeus, between those that knew their history and those that did not know their history. The ones that believed that Abraham Lincoln was the best thing that ever happened to black folk, and the people that realized that their ancestors were the ones that built the pyramids. And Dr. Clark, to answer your original question, I have never had anyone hold me to the fire like Dr. John Henry Clark. My daddy would say he didn't take tea for the fever. He said, brother, he said, the only way you're going to get through me, first of all, he told me, look, man, because he used to always call me, hey, man, how you doing? I still can hear his voice now when I would call him up. And I'd say, hey, Professor Clark, this is Booker T. He said, hey, Booker T, how you doing, man? I can still hear his voice say, hey, man, how you doing? And what he said, man, if you're going to, in the beginning of our relationship, because when I met him at 12 and a half, you know, I'm not going to say that I was up underneath him when I was a child or things like that. I encountered him when I was 14, and I encountered him many times when I was in Harlem. But before I went into the military, I had a conversation with him. But after I came out of the military, that's when I became to be a little bit closer to him, going to different presentations that he did, assisting him in anything that he needed. I would carry his things with him. I would clear his table for him. I'd wipe it down with alcohol, and I would just lay out his materials the way I knew that he wanted it laid out. That's the kind of thing. And then I would go sit down. And then at the end, I would go and do it because he'd be engaged talking to people all the time. He didn't have time to reset everything up, put it in his bag and stuff. So I would do that while he was able to talk to people at the end. And he really was, I wouldn't say discouraging, but I would say he was pushing me. Like he said, look, man, let me tell you, if you're getting into this for the hand clap, he said, this ain't where you want.
Yeah.
Okay, this ain't it. He said, and when I said to him, Dr. Clark, how do you think I can best be of service to our people? He said, you really want to be of service to your people? I said, yeah. He said, get a job. And get a job with a good retirement plan. Because if you depend on your people for your financial status, you ain't going to make it. And also, it's your failure. Because why should they support you? You have to show them how to support themselves. And the only way you can show them to support themselves is to support yourself. That was one of the best pieces of advice he gave me. That's why I became a teacher and retired, because they have the best retirement plan.
Right.
Unions in the country.
Well, speaking of support, man, and supporting ourselves, Heavy as the Crown is coming April 22nd, 2022, 30 days from now. It is available for pre-order. Links are in the description below. Check out the trailer. If you just now tuning in, we played the trailer in the very beginning. Trailer is on the channel. Don't click off the show. Check it out afterwards. You're definitely going to want to see this film. Dr. Kaba, let's go into Heavy as the Crown.
All right.
Let's get Dr. Kaba's official review of Heavy as the Crown. Now you've seen it all the way through. You've seen it a few times. So let's without any spoilers. Let's get your take on it.
Well, let me tell you this about spoiler, my brother Amadeuz Christ. Even if I described every scene, people still would walk away with it from a different perspective. It's not the type of film that when you tell the story, you ruin the outcome. The bottom line is everyone that sits and watches this film is going to walk away with a different story. I've seen it 4 times. The first time I saw it as somebody that didn't know nothing about Kemetic history, knew nothing about Assyrian drama. And sitting there watching what this film was doing was the first time in my life, not only did I ever see it, but that I ever even thought. My neurons weren't connected. And I wanted to see it from that perspective. And then I watched it as I watched the way in which the graphics and the individuals that were being interviewed came into the presentation. And I told you about that one particular scene. Now, that would be a scene spoiler, so I ain't going to say nothing. But there is a particular scene that literally blew my creative mind.
That's saying a lot. Kaba.
There's a lot to be said, brother. It blew my mind the way it happened because of everything else that was going on and where I was at that particular point watching the film. So that's why I watched the graphics and the individuals, because that's when I caught it. Then I went for the music. I went to see how the sounds, the graphics, and the individuals would be meshed. And then the 4th time, I watched it as Kaba Hiawatha Kamene. Because that's how I do films. That's how I've done all the films. Because I have always enjoyed, because I'm really very much into music. And I'm into the type of music that when I'm listening to it, I try to isolate instruments. I try to listen to only when the horns are playing, you know, the aerophones, or when the quarterphones, the guitar, the violin, or whatever it is. I try to, in my mind, I try to isolate them so I can hear them as they are contributing to the overall sound that I'm listening to. And so I've always enjoyed that. I've always enjoyed watching things and breaking it down to see how the person that put it together, because not only the way in which the person put it together shows me something about the film itself, it tells me about what the director and the person had in mind when they did it. There's a difference between holistic and episodic. Episodic is when you're looking at episodes, frames, okay? Holistic is when you put everything together. And so by the fourth time that I had viewed Heavy is the Crown, the fourth time that I saw it, and I saw how it was put together, from the graphics to the drama, to the individual speaking. Even when you look at this trailer, brother, you put this trailer as if we all in the same room and we all have a script and we're talking.
Yeah.
You know, it's like everybody knows their cue, right? But ain't nobody know that wasn't nobody together under any circumstances when this was done. Everybody was in separate places. Nobody watched what the other person did. And so when this happened, and I knew how it happened, because I'm in the back, because I know what I saw. It was just phenomenal, brother.
I appreciate it.
Oh, brother, no, man. You know, brother, I would not tell you if it wasn't true. And I know people say thank you, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I would never insult you. I would never say anything that would hurt your feelings. I would try to give you the very best review I could without saying anything derogatory.
Yeah.
But I would never glorify if it wasn't glorious. This film is glorious. And every child should see this film.
You guys heard it first. You guys heard it from the man himself.
You're talking to someone whose first license is in early childhood education. I'm a kindergarten teacher. And because I've been a kindergarten teacher, first grade, second grade, third grade, straight on up, I have a good idea how children think, because to teach a child, you got to think like a child. And so as a child, as I was sitting there, the first go round, I was there as a child. I ain't never seen this before. I don't even know what this is. Look at where all this is. I'm coming almost like I just barely learned the English language. And I'm going to try to figure all this out as it's coming to me. And brother, that's what you did.
It's exactly what I was thinking as I, you know, because the first Out of Darkness is heavy, right? It's heavy in itself. And there's a lot of facts. There's a lot of information, but it's very directed. And what I did was, with the first Out of Darkness, was I just kind of walked you through the story of what the African story, the African American experience. What Heavy is the Crown, I wanted to make it more digestible, because the content in itself is even more heavy than the first Out of Darkness, because we're getting into these deep philosophical ideas, deep science, agricultural science and history, and the mythology that ties everything together. So in doing so, because the information is so dense, I had to make it digestible for almost like a child. You know, I kind of visualized kids watching this the whole time I was creating it. You know, my son, you know, I would let Zion watch different clips and get his feedback on it. And if I could see that he understood the concepts, then I knew that I had something, you know. And I mentioned this on the Philippe show a couple weeks back when I was on there. You know, a lot of us, we could be very competent and very capable intellectually when it comes to different certain topics. With religion, it seems like we don't really exercise that intellectual capacity as much. And we'll get into that. I want to get your take on that. But I knew that because of the subject matter is so delicate, and when you're talking about religion, you know, it speaks to the inner core of the person because they feel like their identity, so to speak, is attached to that religion. So people are very close-minded when it comes to discussing religion from an objective standpoint. And I knew that going into the film. So I wanted to design it so that it is captivating. It draws you in. It's almost, people have described it as hypnotic almost. It kind of just draws you in. And what it does, you know, the music and the visuals is very colorful. The information is broken down in a way where it's not too heavy, you know, it's palatable. And I really designed it, just like you said, for kids. And so I'm glad you pointed that out. Is there anything else that you kind of took away from that? Oh,
Well,
this is what I wanted to ask you, Dr. Kaba. Before you answer that, did you pick up on the Dogon references?
well, it's all there.
Mm.
It's constantly there.
Mm.
When you're dealing with certain issues, Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, the great Senegalese scholar, talks about the cultural unity
Mm-hmm.
of Black Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I also grew up with neighbors that were from Haiti.
Mm.
And I have also, I can't say I participated in them, but I have been present during ceremonies of voodoo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have known people from Brazil who have been very familiar with candomblé.
Mm.
And I've known people of the English-speaking Caribbean, Obia. And here in America, whether the pastor want to admit it or not, when the pastor get up on Sunday morning, he ain't nothing but Orisha. Because when you look at the Black
Mm-hmm.
Baptist Church, that's straight up Yoruba. And the references of, when you know your history, when you know the cultural unity of Africa, but you know the diversity of Africa, you can see where things are similar.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're dealing with a Kush Kemetic concept, I can hear Dogon.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you're doing something through Dogon, I can hear Kush Kemet. So that what is happening is that you're touching, Dr. Clark used to say, talking in a circle, which means that you have a class of 30 students. You know, some of them are musicians, you know, some of them are into sports, you know, some of them into different areas. So what you attempt to do is you attempt to develop your presentation around different aspects of the point that you're making. It's called being a topic centered. And then you have topic associated, which is the circle that embraces the point. And so when we are there and we are, for instance, Dr. Clark, Dr. James Smalls often says he'll never forget a lecture that Dr. Clark did on Shaka Zulu. And Dr. Smalls says that it is as if when Dr. Clark was speaking, he brought Shaka Zulu in the room. In my analysis of Dr. Clark's presentation, how he taught, he called it talking in a circle. I developed a curriculum that I call teaching in a circle. So he's talking about Shaka. Dr. Clark may have done something about music and Shaka, the role that music played in the training of the Zulu warriors. and then when he noticed that he got the musicians in the room on point, he'd say, and watch what he's doing. He says, okay, now. When he says okay, psychologically, what he's doing is that he is stopping you at that moment in time. You got it. Now, when he says now, he draws you back to the center point. Then he'd go out and he might talk about the way in which they expressed themselves in terms of the Zulu language, how they talk, the way they developed their words. Okay, now he's out there doing language, and all the writers or all the rappers or all the people that are good with words, okay, he got them now. And then he would say, okay, stop the thought. Now he would draw all the language people back into the circle, to the point. So now he's got the musicians and he's got the language. And then he would talk about art. He'd get all the artists, the sculptors, the painters. Okay. Then he would talk about the way in which they would drill themselves physically. Now we got all of the people who are active, the sports people, you know, the people that dance. All these people now are in there. So talking in a circle, you're making a point, whether it's a Dogon point, a Kush Kemet point. The point is topic associated. You'll go around and you bring Congolese in there. You'll bring Southern Africans in there. You'll bring all different types of Africans in, because there's a cultural thread that ties us all together. And Dr. Clark knew how to touch those points. Now, what's very important as an educator, as I've observed, one of the things when you're dealing with children and people, when you talk about outer darkness and you're talking about heavy as the crown, what's very important that when I am looking at things, you have to know the difference between a person that is academically gifted and somebody who is emotionally gifted. I have had the opportunity to teach some of the most brilliant students that don't go below 100 on a test. Brilliant, but emotionally unstable. I have met students that are trying to get 70. We celebrate 70 with them, but they're the future leaders of the world. You get your job because of your academic intelligence. You keep your job because of your emotional intelligence. And one of the things we have to understand is the difference in terms of emotion, because we always say emotion isn't good. No, emotion is good, but there's two types of emotion. One type of emotion that is negative, that is not productive, is anger. Anger is emotion out of control. But there's another type of emotion. It's called passion. Passion is emotion in control. Be passionate, but don't be angry. You cannot produce in anger, but you do nothing but produce in passion. And so when you look at outer darkness and you look at heavy as the crown, there'll be people that will come and tell you, brother, that outer darkness was out of sight, but I couldn't handle heavy. There will be people that will tell you, brother, that heavy is the crown. That was it, brother. I liked Outer Darkness. It was a great film, brother, but you brought things out of me in Heavy as the Crown. You see, you didn't have to bring anything out of anybody in Outer Darkness. It was knowledge, wisdom, information, very important. Phenomenal film. But it was what it was. But Heavy as the Crown goes deep inside your neuronal capacity. It goes inside your neurons. And it takes your head, man. And it says your neurons have been connected wrong since you've been born.
You hear this, people. You hear this. Dr.
That's what
Kaba.
we're dealing with here, brother.
Dr.
Amadeuz.
Kaba. So that brings me to my next question, Dr. Kaba. Ironically, You know, when I call it OOD, when Out of Darkness first came out, I didn't know what the people's response was going to be. I didn't know how well it was gonna be received. I knew that it was an excellent film, but I didn't know what the community response was gonna be. And then we debuted it at the Pan African Film Festival. Me and Sabir, shout out to Sabir. I think he's on here right now. And we did. I remember because it was right when Star Wars: The Force Awakens came out. It was the revamping. I guess that was episode 7. That was the Disney one. And I remember going to see that Star Wars movie in December around Christmas time, and that theater was packed, man. And so the Pan African Film Festival was on 2 months later in February. And I didn't make the first showing. There were 3 showings of Out of Darkness. I didn't make the first one, but Sabir did. And he told me, man, he called me. I was in Georgia at the time. I was living in Georgia. He called me. He was like, bruh, the people are going crazy. And I said, word. And he was like, no, you don't understand. You got to get down here, bruh. So I flew down. I made the second 2 screenings. And Brother Kaba, when I tell you, I've never seen people react like this to a movie ever, especially a documentary. People were crying. People were screaming at the screen. Yeah, brother. You know, it was just like church. People were standing up. There were no more seats. It had sold out, but people were literally standing in the aisles watching this film. And after the film was over, they introduced us. Me and Sabir went to the front. They said, everybody, if you want to meet the director, you know, he's up here. He'll answer some questions. So I answered a few questions from the audience. And the host said, oh, he's also got DVDs for sale. I had a backpack full of DVDs. Literally, as soon as she said he has DVDs, I got rushed. They rushed to the front. Everybody was throwing money in my face. It was just like a circle of $20 bills. And when I tell you those DVDs were gone in about, I couldn't take the money and hand out the DVDs fast enough. That's how quick they were selling. We sold out of every DVD. I might have had like, I don't know, 50 of them, but they sold out in less than 4 minutes. And I said all that to say, after, you know, we went on tour, you know, we went all over the country, Detroit, North Charleston, New York, Atlanta, everywhere in between. And the people loved Out of Darkness. They loved it. So I thought when I announced the second film, there was going to be, you know, an outrageous amount of outpouring support for Heavy as a Crown, because I did a crowdfunding. I did an Indiegogo for the first Out of Darkness, and I think we only raised like 3,000. So I said, okay, I'll eat that. I'll take that. After people see this film, when I do the next crowdfunding for Heavy as the Crown, then it would be substantially more, right? That's what I thought after all of the support. And it was the opposite. I think we only raised like $2,000. And I noticed that there wasn't the support for Heavy as a Crown. Still isn't. That there was initially for Out of Darkness. And my thought was, okay, this is triggering because it's dealing with religion. And there's certain topics in the Black community that are taboo, that we can't touch, we can't talk about, we can't discuss them. One of those topics is feminism. Another one of those topics is religion. And I noticed that even in me posting stuff on Facebook, posting updates about Heavy as a Crown, I noticed that not only were people not liking the post, but I was losing likes on my page. And I said, oh, that's weird. And the more I would post, the more people would unfollow the page. And I'm like, oh, this is, it's letting me know that this is triggering something for a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of support. There's a lot of support for this film. That's not what I'm saying, because the Instagram is growing. But what I'm saying is, I noticed that people don't want to have their spiritual and religious shoestrings pulled. And I could imagine if, because Out of Darkness was an expose, so to speak. I think people think that Heavy is the Crown is going to attack religion and attack spirituality. And I wanted to get your take on that, because I showed it to my father. My father is an ordained deacon, Southern Baptist, straight up and down. And I had him watch it. And I wanted to get his thoughts on it. And he told me that, he said, this is going to change the world. He said, this is going to it's very interesting. He's like, and I asked him, I said, did it feel like an attack on Christianity? He said, no, not at all. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and why is religion and spirituality so triggering for us as Black people?
From my study of our history, brother, with the horrendous treatment that Africans and African Americans have gone through at the hands of these rather rude people, Western world. When we were on this is my view. We were on plantation, and we were exposed to a horrendous life from childhood. You see, this is another thing that many of us are not exposed to in terms of our history, our everyday lives on the plantation. They found bones in the African American burial. They found bones of a man that was said to be 29 years of age, but he had the body of someone who was 77. They would work Africans so hard into the ground that their bodies would literally, by years, grow. By 7 years sometimes. Every year for white folk was 7 years for Black folk, in terms of the stress and the pain and the struggle and the terroristic disaster. We all sit aghast. For those that may not know, we sit aghast now as it relates to what Russia is doing to Ukraine. There's no one on the planet that understands what the Ukrainians are going through than Black folk. Black folk lived through that terroristic disaster, not just in Africa, but when they brought us here. Just the day-to-day terror in our hearts and in our minds. Just think of our sisters. I always go back to that scene in Birth of a Nation, the second one by our brother. One of the most poignant, powerful scenes is when that sister's being brought up to the big house to do the pleasure of one of the owner's friends. And her husband, her boyfriend, however it may be, the African man that considered himself to be her mate, was underneath that window, knowing what was happening to his woman. And I watched when she came back out, and how he looked at her and how she looked at him, and how they hugged. That is Black love. That he could see her beyond what was being done to her, and she could see him as her man, despite what that old nasty, rude man did. But to get through your days, you had to start to believe in something that could get you through. You had to hold on to something, no matter how illusionary it was. You still had to hold on to it, because it's what got you through your day. And this story of this Jesus the Christ, that was the Son of God. The Son of God. Think of it from Black folk position. the Son of God. And God let his son be treated like this. And so black folks psychologically said, well, if that's what God would do to his only begotten son, why would I be surprised that I'm being treated like this by the same people, the Romans? And so this belief system became our crutch. And I pay honor, if I may, to Christianity for this, because Dr. Amos Wilson always tells us that a good organization solves its people's problems and meets its people's needs. And a person will adhere to its tenets, to its rules, beyond belief, if it solves their problems and meets their needs. And for what we went through on that plantation, here in the colonies, Central South America, the Caribbean, what we went through, we embraced this Jesus because believing in him helped us live. And if Christianity didn't exist, there's a good chance a lot of us would not exist either. Because we would have committed suicide.
Right.
We would have killed ourselves, or we would have openly revolted and just been shot down dead right where we stood. So when I see Christianity and I understand it for what it did for us, it solved our problems and it met our needs. However, when a spiritual system no longer meets your needs and solves your problem, it's like carrying the boat on your back after you cross the river. What got you across the river was beautiful. You needed it. But if you strap that boat on your back, it becomes a burden on land. Park that boat by the water, but walk free. And so when I look at how religion has impacted us and how tenaciously we hang on to it, we're hanging on to it because transgenerationally and intergenerationally, this is what helped us through our pain. And if you can feel that pain, then you can respect our brothers and sisters who are not ready to step out there yet. It's still a crutch. They don't think they can walk. They think they cripple. So when we tell them, throw away those crutches, they're scared.
Right.
That's all they've ever known.
Right.
Those
Brother Kaba, when I first presented this information to my father, again, I was raised Christian. I was raised Baptist. He's a deacon. And we've had many, many conversations about spirituality. And he tells me, he's like, you can present all the information that you want. And I'll believe it. And it might very well be true. But he tells me, he's at the age now, he's like, I'm not going to change my beliefs. I'll take in new information, but I'm not going to change my beliefs. And I said, that's fine. I'm not really trying to change anybody's belief system. What I'm trying to do is Africanize it and expand it. And if we can see the Africanity in it, it just makes it that much more powerful. But the one thing that he did say, which made total sense, he said, he's talking to me. I raised you in the church, and the church gave you your moral foundation. And he says, now, if you take away Christianity, you take away the moral foundation. And I thought about that. This is before he said this to me before I was working on Heavy as a Crown. And before I kind of got really deep into the, African spiritual systems. And that point always stood out to me. So in him watching Heavy as a Crown and seeing the principles of Ma'at and the laws of Ma'at and the 42 declarations of innocence, he finally understood that we did have that moral code. You know, the 10 commandments that Christians live by came out of the 42 laws of Ma'at per se, and way more extensive, but it was something that wasn't a commandment to us. It was something that we just lived every day. So in touching on that, I wanted to get your thoughts on the concept of Ma'at, balance, harmony, which seems to be the center of this African spiritual system. How important was that to the African, to the people of Kemet?
It was everything and all. Ma'at was the path. And as you know, as you were doing this film, brother, when I and my son Heru came to Detroit and we filmed our portion of Heavy as the Crown, I was in the process of writing my book, Spirituality Before Religions. That's why I told you that it was so phenomenal that these two things would be going on at the same time, because I was ripe to talk to you about it, because I was right there developing this concept of spirituality before religions. And the reason why I wrote Spirituality Before Religions was because of a brilliant, wonderful man such as your father. I do not in my book say anything negative about any religion. I can't. If I put Christianity down, then I got to put Shabaka Stone down. I got to put the pyramid text down. If I say anything bad about the Hebrew faith system, I got to put down what Kemet. If I say anything against Islam, I got to put down Kemet. If I say anything against Buddhism or Zoroastrian or whatever Rosicrucian, I'm putting it down, because the purpose of my book, Spirituality Before Religions, was to show our community that whatever religion you are, from A to Z, from agnostic to Zoroastrian, you found your script on the walls and on the script of Africa. So you're not throwing away Christianity. You're doing what you just said. You are Africanizing it. And what I wanted people to do is to Africanize whatever you are. I don't have a religion for you. People say to me, well, what religion are you, brother? I say, I'm African. So when you say about Ma'at being a living code, it wasn't no religion that people prayed. It was a way of living that the scripture allowed them to go back and remind them every so often that the cosmos and the earth and nature and you are the living embodiment of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, arrangement. But the one I like the best, reciprocity. You shall reap what you sow. What go around, come around. Malcolm would have said it like, for what's going on now in the world, chickens have come home. And so what we're dealing with is a people who are still not sensitive to the fact that I'm not trying to take away your religion. I don't have a religion to give you, but here's what I know. I know that if your temple is built on weak stilts, I know that if I come to you and I knock those stilts down, I tell you, don't know, weak stilts, I knock them down, your house is going to fall and your temple will no longer exist. But if I should put stronger stilts under that house, the weak ones will fall away. Heavy is the crown, is the strong stilts that's going to make the weak religions fall away.
Uh-oh. I hope you prepared, people.
But you're going to be Africanized. You may give up your religion, but you're going to embrace where your religion came from, which is African spirituality.
That's it.
And if you can't do that, then you need a lot more help than any film or book can do.
Brother Kaba, as we look at the Shabaka stone, we look at the pyramid text. We look at the Aten text. We look at all of this writing that was carved in stone. Did our ancestors foresee a time that Egypt or ancient Kemet would collapse under the pressure of these northern invaders? The Tamahu, the Sea People, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Did they create these texts and especially carve it in stone specifically for us in this time period to go back and look back and rescue that knowledge, that ancient knowledge, and resurrect it in the process of what we would call today Sankofa? Is that the reason, do you think, that they carved this in stone?
Brother, the reason why, this is to me now, this is a Kaaba thought. There is no difference between our ancestors who carved in stone and you who carve on film. It's the same thing. We are looking for a time beyond us. The books that I wrote on Amazon is not just for this generation. It's for generations that will never know my name. Make no mistake about it, Brother Amadeus. Out of darkness and heavy is the crown, and all of your future works. When you talk about the interest that it has created today, don't be let down, brother. Because there will be generations that will lift your work up and consider it sacred. Just like we hold up the work of people like Martin Delaney in the middle 1800s, just like we hold up the work of those that came before us. Beethoven was not honored when he lived the way he's honored now.
Right.
If he had known, well, let's bring it up. Malcolm X could never have perceived that they would name streets after him. They would create stamps in his honor. They would have days for him. They would build schools in his name. When that brother was assassinated on February 21st, 1965, he had no idea the legacy that he was leaving. And it wasn't, well, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it in terms of what Ossie Davis, the actor, did. When he ended his eulogy by calling him our shining black prince, that's what he's been since that moment of bringing him into existence as our shining black prince. But Malcolm did not know the impact that he would have on people because most of the people were against him when they shot him.
Right.
He had good friends, just like Jesus had a couple of apostles, just like Martin Luther King had a couple of apostles. Okay, the prophet is never honored in his own time. And so what we're doing is for the future. Everything I do for the future. I'd like to think I can benefit from it today. I'd like folk to go on and get my books. I'd like them to go onto my website and get what they get. I'd like to see this, but I may never see this in my lifetime. But that's not why I'm doing this. My website, I have a study guide. It is the most important document I have ever produced and that I will ever produce. And I do it in honor of Dr. Clark because I told Dr. Clark one time, I said, you know, Dr. Clark, I could never repay you for what you did for me. He said, you're right, because you ain't got that much money. But he said, you can do something for me. If you want to pay me back, pay it forward. Do for others what I did for you. And that is how I've developed my relationships. And when you and I were talking, when I hear you talk about how you perceived out of darkness in the beginning. I've told you this personally on the phone in our conversations. I told you this in San Francisco when you picked me up and we went to Whole Foods to eat lunch. I told you what I'm about to say now. I knew you were a genius back then. I knew when Sabir called me and put you on the phone the first time we ever spoke. I knew you were a genius. And after you did Out of Darkness and I told you how great it was, and then you started telling me about Heavy is the Crown, And you started telling me if you thought outer darkness was something, wait till you see heavy as the crown. There wasn't a doubt in my mind. There wasn't a doubt in my mind, brother.
Absolutely.
There wasn't a doubt in my mind. And that's how I feel about all the other work that you will produce as you move through your process. You will get better. And you'll get better because that's the only way you can go. Better. And so as I look at all of this, my brother, and I see what's happening, I think sometimes we get caught up in the moment. You know, we would like to see what we want to see in our own existence. And I think of our ancestors on the plantation. I think of our ancestors who were going through this terroristic disaster, this Ma'afa, this terroristic disaster. And I think about their daily lives and what they went through and what they experienced and the pain that they felt. And I look at them embracing life. And I watch them keeping on, keeping on. And I've come to realize that they kept on keeping on because they knew that they would not be free in their lifetime. But there was something that they knew. They knew if they kept on keeping on, somebody would. And when they felt that way, Brother Amadeus, they manifested us into existence. That was hundreds of years ago. They manifested Amadeuz Christ and Kaba Hiawatha.
Absolutely.
They brought us into existence, even though it might have taken 100 years, 150 years. They manifested us. And that's what we're doing. We are manifesting our future. We have no right to give up now. If our ancestors could do what they did under the conditions that they were living, I got it made, brother. When I go to bed and I dream, I have a hard time. I wake up and apologize.
Yeah. Dr. Kaba, and we're gonna wrap up in a few, but I have a few more questions for you. I want you in the film you discuss how a group of Africans migrated out of Africa and traveled north and got caught in an ice age because they endured a very, very harsh and cold climate. And that was their war with nature. That was their original trauma that they experienced. And they came back down out of that ice with that traumatized mindset and went to war with the world and went to war with ancient Kemet and went to war with Africa. I want you to talk about that ice age mentality and how it will eventually evolve into them taking over Christianity and taking over the spiritual systems of Kemet.
Interesting you asked that question, brother, because I just started every third Friday of the month. I have a webinar. And I just started this past Friday. I did part 1 of the origin and evolution of the Caucasoid. And it's going to be in 4 different sections, and it has a book list. I'll go deeper into it for anyone that's interested to understand how Africans could become Indo-Europeans, how the Grimaldi became Cro-Magnon. When T. Owens Moore, brilliant doctor, wrote a book, The Science of Melanin, Dark Matters. And he's brilliant in his analysis. But in one of his chapters in his book, he talks about the skin and the brain are very similar. In our bodies, we have many different things, but we're going to cite 2 in particular, organs and glands. The job of an organ is to work. Your heart is an organ. It works. It does something. Your glands secrete liquids. very important hormones in the body to keep the body functioning. The skin and the brain are the only two that are both an organ and a gland. Your skin will do work. It's the largest organ on your body, and your skin also secretes liquids, so it also acts as a gland. Your brain works. It's an organ, but it also secretes liquids, such as the colostrum oil, serotonin, melatonin, things like that. So that the skin and the brain are very similar. When degrees dip down between 200, let's just say 200 and 400 degrees below zero, you know when it's real cold outside, for those that are in places where it gets real cold and you get frostbite, people say in 20 minutes, bare skin can be frostbitten. Well, that's like when you're like minus something, minus 3, minus 4 degrees. But now up in the Ice Age, which is the 51st parallel, north, up, it's like a cap on top of the earth. Cuts across the top of America and Canada, and it cuts across Europe. And in these frigid temperatures, you see, humans create their creator through their view of nature. In the warm climate, in the tropical climate, nature feeds us. And if a mango is ready to be eaten and we're not ready to take it, it'll fall on our head. Nature tells us, hey, I'm ready. I'm ready to give you sustenance. In the warm climate, nature takes care of you. Nature is nurturing. Nature loves nature. But when you get up into the ice, nature becomes brutal, murderous, jealous, envious. And so what the African did, and we're looking at maybe 40,000 years ago, give or take. I'm afraid of dates because they're going to change once we start doing the research. Africans ventured up into this area. And when they ventured up into this, they got up into Europe, which is like the Caucasus Mountains, just south of Ukraine. Okay, in Georgia, over to the east is Russia. And then you have all the countries. The same map that we're looking at today is the same map I'm talking about. And in these frigid temperatures, and if you look at a map, particularly a relief map, because it'll tell you like the mountains will be raised and the waters will be down. So you'll be able to see the structure of the earth. And there's mountains that go across this part of the world. The Himalayas, the Caucasus Mountains. As you travel across, I mean, these mountains became ice barriers. Where, see, the Africans went in during an interstadial, which is a warming trend. They didn't walk in on an ice age. They walked in on what's called an interstadial. Just to give some background information, there's basically 4 ice ages that have been recorded. There's a man by the name of Louis Agassiz, Agazziz. And he says there were 4 ice ages. I'm going to focus on the ones in Europe because that's all we have to be concerned about now. And that the first was the Gunz, G-U-N-Z. Then came the Mindel, M-I-N-D-E-L. Then came the Riss. But what happened is that there was a worm glaciation. So about 1.75 million years ago, the Gunz age started. Now, again, I'm not getting caught up in dates, but basically there. And then that lasted a couple 100,000 years, and then it came a warming trend. And then the next wave came the next ice age, which was called the Gunz Riss. And then there was an interstadial, the Mindel, and then the Riss. But in between every ice age, there came a warming trend. Africans got up in there during the Worm 1 ice age. It was a warming trend, somewhat like what Europe would be today.
Mm-hmm.
Seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
But what they didn't know was they hadn't been there long enough to know that an ice age was coming. All ice ages originate in what we call Greenland, and they fan out across the globe. But they also travel underground. So that by the time it got to the Africans, it had already passed them in that part of Europe and gone into the mountains, and it created ice mountains, and Africans could not retreat back south. So they had to go in the caves, and they had to bunk clothes. Same thing we do in the wintertime, in where we have seasons, okay? In New York, we change our clothing, okay? What I got on right now, this ain't what I'm going to have in August. I'm going to have a tank top, you know? In wintertime, we wear this because we're trying to cover ourselves. But now what happens when you cover your body and you go in caves, you deny yourself the ability to get sunlight.
Mm.
And so in order to survive, you depigment. And that's what we do. All of us have depigmented, those that go through seasons.
Mm.
I am not the complexion now that I'm going to be in August. And I am not the complexion now that I was last August.
Right.
Even the most melanated person loses pigment in the absence of the sun. That's science. That's not personal. Even women and men of European descent, they got kinky hair in the summer. But see, they don't want to call it kinky. So they call it frizzy.
Mm.
They have products called Frizz Ease.
Mm.
No, that's kinky hair.
Mm.
Because in hot weather, no matter what texture your hair, it will curl elliptically.
Mm.
Now, for some who don't have as curly a hair as others, that's what happened. But when you get into that cold climate, what occurs is your hair in your sebaceous gland, in your hair follicle, you have an oily, waxy substance called sebum, S-E-B-U-M. And this sebum is released in little packets, and they explode, and the oil travels up the hair follicles, and it rests on your scalp and on your body. That's why when you touch yourself and you feel, people say, I feel clean. Well, that's sebum that you're feeling. You're oily. That's what it is. You know, because you have hair all over your body. So it's not just hair. Now, in the hot tropical weather, the reason why we have sebum and the reason why it comes to our scalp is to protect our scalp from the harmful rays of the sun. Okay? Just like when you get your hair straightened and they put that base up on there, well, that's what sebum does. It protects you from the harmful rays of the sun. But when that African went into colder climates, they no longer needed the sebum to burn to be able to protect the scalp. So what it did, it attached itself to the hair follicle, and that's what made it straight.
Dr. Kaba, what did that ice age and the ice do to the mentality of those Africans who came back down as Eurasians?
Thank you, brother. You brought me back to the point I was making before I went walking in a circle like Dr. Clark. I tell you that the skin and the brain are similar. Okay. So while the skin was going through its deformation, its depigmentation to survive, the brain did too. Take a grape, plump, liquid grape, put it in the sun. The liquids will be drawn out of it, and a grape becomes a raisin. In the limbic system of your brain, you have 3 jewels, 3 glands. You have the pituitary body responsible for your physical growth. You have the optic thalami, the eye of your 2 thalami, because you got 2 thalamus, right and left, but the optic is the eye of it where they both meet, called the optic thalami. That is responsible for your emotional growth. Your pineal gland is responsible for your spiritual growth. And in this extreme cold, just like a grape becomes a raisin, a pineal gland becomes decalcified. So what sun-dried the grape, freeze-dried the pineal gland. And it strips the individual it limits the individual to perceive the imperceivable. So therefore, you depend on your 3 dimensions, your height, your width, and your depth. But Dr. Bruce Bynum teaches us in Dark Light that the original human beings, black folk, we lived in 6 dimensions. Because when you combine length, width, and depth together, you then go into your 4th dimension, which is the time-space continuum, where you know information from all time, history, and all space, geography. You can place yourself any place in the world because you know the 3 dimensions and you have brought them together. When you get to a certain expertise in your 4th dimension, time, space, you then graduate to the 5th dimension, which is you walk in the light, which is the ancestral flood of memories. And when you get to that point, you then can contribute to the world your divine gift. And that's the 6th dimension, which is gravity. And gravity means that you've left your footsteps in the cosmic universe. Your place on the earth has been codified. What you have done, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Martin Delaney, Queen Mother Moore. I could go through the list of our scholars, Dr. Richard King. I could go through all of the scholars, and they all have left their footprints because the fact that we're calling them their names today, that's one of their souls that they leave. One of the souls that they leave is the memory that you have placed in the minds of the people. So to go back to your question, when you see how these individuals act, how they conduct themselves, that's a calcified pineal gland.
Okay.
Now, I don't speak in absolutes because there are some people that are thawed out. And I know that because I'm not going to come to our community and speak in absolutes.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Say again. There we go.
I said only a Sith deals in absolutes.
That the Sith Lord only deals in absolutes. That's right. That's where I got the concept from. Okay. There are exceptions to all rules, just like I know a couple black folk got calcified pineal gland.
Right. I know a few too. I know
Come
a
on,
few.
but only when we tell this truth and tell this truth to our children. That's balance. That's ma'at. Okay, when you're on one side and saying that white folk are horrible and black folk, all white folk are horrible and all black folk are great. Well, when children start seeing good white folk, bad black folk, now they got some questions, mommy, daddy, because you told me that they all bad. But this one over here looked like me, and look at how he treated me, and look at how that one was the one that saved me from him.
Right.
So we have to be careful. But that doesn't mean I'm not black first. I'm black first. Like Malcolm say, I think black, I eat black, I sleep black, I live black. And I don't, well, you know, I hear some people say unapologetically and unashamedly, but quite frankly, I ain't got nothing to apologize for. I ain't got nothing to be ashamed of. I am black first. I look out for my people because everybody looking out for their own. The only time we get multicultural is when it comes around to us taking care of us. All of a sudden, we got to be multicultural. You know? I respect all cultures, but I look out for my own.
Absolutely. Dr. Kaba, these Africans who depigmented themselves and came back down as the Eurasians that we know today, they begin to attack African culture, African societies. They begin invading. They eventually conquer Egypt, which the Europeans really didn't conquer. I mean, Alexander basically walked into Kemet. The Greeks, there wasn't much of an invasion, but what they did do is they begin to take over the ancient Kemetic spiritual systems. And they begin to distort them. And they begin to subtract the science from them. And they begin to use that new religion as a form of weaponization, as a form of conquering and oppressing. I wanted you to touch on that before we get out of here, but my specific question in regards to that is, and this is a question that a lot of people ask, Dr. Kaba, if Africans were so great and ancient Kemet was so great, and Ghana and Songhai and the empires of Mali and the Moors, and it was so great and so powerful, how did Africa fall?
You know how many children ask me that question?
Mm-hmm.
Because to them, they're looking at something.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, there's a couple of things. One thing is that by 525 BC, when Cambyses and the Persians came into Kemet,
Mm-hmm.
the world was moving out of the Bronze Age and they were going into the Iron Age. And many Indo-Europeans had an advantage because of their land as it related to iron. Black folk were producing iron for a very long time. But the mind of the warrior was such that everything they did, they could convert it into a weapon. So one thing that happened was a mastery of weapon, because Black folk knew how to fight. They were the mightiest warriors on earth for a very long time, but they did not have, they lived by Ma'at fundamentally. And so what the Indo-European brought was hell. And I often tell Black folk that many of us are angels living in hell. And when angels live in hell, even angels have to act devilish because you're in hell. Don't go so deep inside that devilish way that when you get back up into heaven, you start acting devilish in heaven, because ain't no place for devils in heaven. And quite frankly, there ain't no place for angels in hell. And so in the world that we lived in, we had to develop on a liar, a cheater, and a thief. And those individuals also supported those that lived the same life. And so there was a change in the world dynamic that went from 6th dimension to 3 dimension, from 6-dimensional thinkers into 3-dimensional thinkers. And when a 6-dimensional thinker is made to think in 3 dimensions, it's like putting a whale in a goldfish bowl. Ain't much oxygen in there to breathe.
Mm.
And so in so many different ways, what they did is they took our 6-dimensional spiritual system and reduced it into 3 dimensions. And that's why you are judged by how much money you give to the church. And that is why God is mentioned more on coins and money bills than in the Bible. Every coin, every Bible, every coin, every dollar bill say, "In God we trust." So God must be money. That's 3-dimensional because you can touch it. But what happens when you live in a system that can't be touched, can't be seen, can't be smelt, can't be tasted, can't be thought? Oh yeah, because thinking is a sense. We have 6 senses, not 5. Thinking is a sense. What happens to that individual when they're in a world that was based on balance, but now lives imbalanced? What do you do? Who do you talk to? Who do you trust? There's an indigenous proverb that says, "We began to beat the pale face when we learned how to lie." What do we do in a world like that? If you're trying to negotiate with me in good faith, and I'm smiling at you and willing to go, and yeah, that's great. You turn your back and I knock you upside your head.
Mm-hmm.
How do you live in a world like that? How do you make choices in your life But it don't make no difference, because when all is said and done, if you an angel in hell, you better act devilish, because you ain't gonna survive. You ain't gonna survive. And now we've been around long enough to understand that. And you know, Amadeus, and to all those who are tuned in, we all know why they didn't want us to learn how to read. Because they saw Amadeuz Christ coming up. The reason why they didn't want us in Hollywood and in their movies, and the reason why people like Oscar Micheaux was so important, and Paul Robeson was so important, and even Stephen Fetchit, because had there not been Stephen Fetchit, there would be no Kevin Hart or Richard Pryor. No matter how we view them in the past, they did the best they could with what they had. And they ushered in a new generation until we now get someone like Kevin Hart or Steve Harvey. If you want to, I'm talking about comedians that are in positions of influence and finance. I know why they never wanted us in sports, because they knew Michael Jordan was coming. They didn't want, not only did they want us in sports, they didn't want women in sports, because they saw the Williams sisters coming. And they definitely saw Simone Biles. And I call it the Simone Biles effect. You know, the Simone Biles effect is that this sister is so good at what she does, they tell her she can't do it because no one else of them can do it. And if they do, if she does it and performs it, she'll take it to the next level, and no one will ever be able to rise to that level. But guess what? Sister did it anyway. And I'm telling you now, what we did in sports, what we did in entertainment, we can do the same thing in the classroom and in the church if we just Africanize us and cast aside your white God. Embrace your African spirituality. That's what Boukman and Cecile told us in Alligator Pond. You are free. Cast aside your white God. And if you walk into heavy is the crown, with your crown, you are going to cast aside your white God and put the crown on a black person, which should be you. But let me tell you one other thing about what we're experiencing, particularly right now, because I think it's important for us to see what's going on, because sometimes contemporary events are very important. The Indo-European people, on the whole, have never managed a civilization more than 500 years. When Cambyses and the Persians came into Kemet about 525 BC, by 332, the Greeks were in there. That's a little over 180 years. Greeks were there from 332. By 30 BC, the Romans was in there. That's a little over 330 years. Then the Romans came in. Everybody want to give Romans credit to be 500 AD. I see them falling apart 300, the late 300s AD. So from 30 BC until 300 something AD, that's a little over 300 and something years. Then they fell, and then Europe went into darkness and stayed in darkness until 711, when black folk came in and brought civilization back in and kept it there for 780 something years up until 1492. So when you look at the Moorish Empire, they lasted longer than some of the combined your Indo-European.
In Europe.
In Europe, yes. And if you want to
Insane.
look at them as world powers, even in the world powers. But you see, the other thing is that from 1492 until now, see that the Roman Empire fell. I call this the Omen Empire. Because not only is it evil, but it's a premonition. It's telling us as black folks something, that we have to get ourselves together. Because they have never been able to maintain a civilization. It has always fallen, and it always fell for the same exact reason. It's not based in a six-dimensional thinking world. It's based in a three-dimensional world where everything is transactional. Okay, I like you because what you can do for me. But what about the God in me greeting the God in you? Oh, that ain't got nothing to do with this conversation. The Old Kingdom alone lasted over 2,100 years. One dynasty, one kingdom, 6 families. were in power for over 2,100 years, could even be longer than that. These folk can't even get it right 500 years because this is falling now. Understand it. This civilization is falling. Understand it. But family, I'm giving us a very strong obligation to us, to our future, and to our children. Because every time they have fallen, we have always been the force that raised them. And every time they rose because they parasitically attached themselves to us. And the reason why they fell was because they could never understand what we were teaching them in the first place. And what we're experiencing now is what Dr. Wade Nobles calls vomit. Vomit. Vomit is, they sat before the Kemites and the Moors, and they ate a very rich meal of which they didn't have the intellectual or spiritual enzymes to digest. So they upchucked it. They vomited back out. And what they vomited is Western civilization. And what I say to you is don't throw the vomit away. Examine the vomit. Don't eat it. Don't try to smell it. Don't touch it. Examine it. Because in that vomit is the original meal. They didn't have the enzymes to break it down, but African folk do. So what I'm saying is, let's recook this meal and let's eat it because we can digest it. Heavy as the crown is that portion of the rich meal that you, Brother Amadeus, have examined the vomit of Western civilization. You found out what the meal was. And the meal is called heavy as the crown. And I'm saying, let's eat.
Brother Kaba, you couldn't have taken us out any better. I had a few more questions, but you answered them all as you normally do, as you usually do. Brother Kaba, it's been a wonderful conversation. I thank you. My listeners, thank you. Where can the people who are listening, where can they find your books?
Please allow me to let you know that I do a webinar every Tuesday. I do a webinar every first Sunday of the month and every third Friday of the month. The first Sunday of the month webinar is dedicated to my book, Shabaka Stone. I go chapter by chapter to explain, to embellish, to enhance my book, because there was so much I wanted to say. I knew I could never say it in just one book. So I have a companion webinar series that I do. The third Friday of the month, I put up my other webinar, which now is the origin and evolution of the Caucasoid. You can go to my my Instagram page. I use my Instagram page as my community bulletin board, where I'm putting up information that I think the community should know. So I list all of my webinars and all of my webinars. And you can purchase my book, Spirituality Before Religions. You just got to go to the link in my bio. You can also go to my website, which I encourage you to do, www.kabakamene.com. KABAKAMENE. KabaKamene.com. There we go. That's the books right there. And you can put your email in and you'll get my 6-day e-course and study guide free. And then you'll also be introduced to my work, my catalog, other things that I have up. And I have things up for $0. It's free. And I mean that to be free. There are things I have $0+, which is if you want it free, it's free. But if you feel you want to put a little bit more in there, you can do that too. And then there are things that have prices. That's on my website. And so webinars, my Instagram page at Kaba Kamene, KABAKAMENE. And then my website, www.kabakamene.com. My books are up on Amazon. I wrote 3 books. The first one was Professor William Leo Hansberry, who is the archetype, who is the architect for America's African Studies program. I paid homage, intellectual libation to my brother, who I walk in footsteps. My second book was Spirituality Before Religion, subtitled Spirituality is Unseen Science, Science is Seen Spirituality. My third book is Shabaka Stone. Shabaka Stone is an African theory on the origin and continuing development of the cosmic universe. And that is the material that I have. And for those that say, okay, brother, I like you, I'd like to give you something, but my Cash App is $ Kaba Kamene 7. That's why your number 7 is so interesting to me.
You see it? You see it on the screen? There's a couple
Yes,
sevens.
Yeah. They're all there.
Uh-huh.
And you know, brother, I would like to just end this part of what I'm saying by telling you how proud I am of you.
Thank you, brother Kaba.
And all that you represent over the years. I think we were first together in 2015. I remember being outside the Marcus Garvey bookstore.
Oh yeah.
And doing that piece on Malcolm. That was what, the 50th anniversary of Malcolm's assassination. That's what started your promoting Out of Darkness.
Yes, sir. Yep.
But brother, from the moment I met you, spoke to you, I'm not even going to say met you, if you want to consider talking to you on the phone, I have always known this path that you were going. There's sometimes that you can just see things. You can feel things. But brother, you're doing fantastic work. Blacknificent, blacktastic. And I know that the creator within you is doing great things for all of us. And I just want to thank you for all the work that you're putting into it. I send my regards to your family and all of those that hold you up, because I know that all of us are really just the tip of the iceberg, because it's who supports us that really takes us. And family who are listening, I say respect and support this brother. They say that money is the root of all evil, but money is also the root of our emancipation.
Oh yeah.
And liberation. Money talk, and you know what walk. And brother, you deserve everything that's coming your way. And I can see greatness. They will call your name like they call Oscar Michaud. Generations, centuries from now, they will recognize your work. Just like we see the blaxploitation films. Well, this is a new type of venue of work. And you're doing it.
Man, I don't know what to say. I'm speechless, brother Kaba. I'm speechless. I really appreciate you for being here. I appreciate you for your contribution to this film and to Out of Darkness, and just those phone calls I would get from you regularly as I was in the process of creating this film. Your information that you shared with me about the Shabaka Stone changed the whole course of this film from what it was until what it is now. Your conversations, Professor Small conversations with me in my travels to Kemet with Brother Tony Browder, you three are what I consider to be my Holy Trinity. And you guys really played an integral part in shaping this narrative, shaping Heavy as a Crown, shaping Out of Darkness, holding me to a high standard, supporting me, providing me with knowledge and your wisdom, and encouraging me to move forward in this process. Because there was times when I was down, Brother Kaba. There was times where I had my doubts and I didn't know if this was going to actually happen, but I would get a phone call from one of you three and you tell, keep it going, brother, keep going. Don't halfway do it. If you're going to do it all the way. And that's what we did. And I am pretty sure that the viewing audience will see that when they see this work. And it was I just attribute it to the ancestors, Brother Kaba. So I thank you. I thank you for appearing on our first show. Again, this is the very first 7 Collection show, very first live stream. And I'm sure, Dr. Kaba, I'm sure you'll be back on real soon. After Heavy as a Crown comes out, we'll get you back on so we could discuss it in more detail with some, we won't have the spoiler situation. So again, thank you for coming on the show. They can reach you on your Instagram, on your Facebook page. Kaba, how many Instagram followers do you have? You have like 80, what, 80? Is it 80K?
I think I'm at, the last time I checked, I think I'm at 97.
Woo! 97,000.
Times are changing, brother.
97,000.
The word is getting out there, brother.
My goodness.
The word is getting out there.
My goodness.
And, we have to understand that this is an anointed time. This is an appointed time. The stars have crossed. And they're bringing us together. And I celebrate everyone who has interest in this work. It is liberating. It's time that we get ourselves together and we answer our sister Harriet Tubman's question. What you gonna do? You see what I did? What you gonna do? We answer Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, and Booker T. Washington, and all those that came before us. What you gonna do? To our brother Huey P. Newton, man, when you arranged me to go to that museum and sit in that chair, okay, what a surprise, wonderful surprise. And so the only thing in invoking Huey P. Newton that is within me, all I want to tell our people is all power to the people.
All power to the people. Brother Kaba, we're going to keep it pushing. Heavy as the Crown, April 22nd. You're going to see Kaba in there. You're going to see Tony Browder in there. You're going to see Professor James Small in there. You're going to see Atlantis Browder. You're going to see Sabir Bey in there. You're going to see Taj Tariq Bey in there. You're going to see David Banner in there. We got a very special lineup. Dr. Wade Nobles. We got Mfudishi Jehutimas in there. We got all of the heavy hitters.
Oh my goodness.
Links are in the description box below. Pre-orders are available now. We got a lot of stuff coming. So thank you guys for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share this out. If you want to support the channel, the links are in the description box below. Brother Kaba, thank you once again for being here and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us.
Hotep family.
See you guys on the next episode. Peace, peace.